You are live. Hello and welcome. We are hosting the very first live video podcast via YouTube from the D-MTEC ETH Zurich Teaching Innovations Lab. My name is Eric Jentges, and I have here with me two guests who are Dr. Johannes Meuer, a researcher and lecturer at D-MTEC, and Arber Sejdiji, who is a student in our MSc program. I'm very glad to have you. This is an experiment, and we hope that you can join our very spontaneous invitation during your lunch break on YouTube. If you have questions, do add your comments directly in YouTube. It will pop up in our broadcasting studio here, and we can enter them into our conversation. Today, it is going to be about experience from remote teaching. If we think back 12 months ago, we were in a different world. And this really pertains also to our students' lives. And I hope, Arber, you can say a few things about that. And also to our lecturers' lives. And Johannes, you would be a voice to channel the experiences of lecturers in this shift to remote teaching. I myself, I'm an educational developer, so I support our lecturers and I try to build a bridge to students in setting up teaching and also in shifting this teaching from a face-to-face classroom into a remote teaching situation. Our guests today are Dr. Johannes Meuer, and Johannes has a very global career already. He has a PhD from Rotterdam School of Management and an MSc from the International Economics from Corvinus University in Budapest, Hungary. He has been at the Marshall Business School in Los Angeles and at the China-Europe International Business School in Shanghai, China. And he has been at the Universidad Complutense in Madrid, Spain. So quite a few different experiences that you bring in from different educational institutions. And there are several other stations in your life already in Faculty of Management, University of Warsaw, and the University of Zurich, which is almost the exotic outsider in this long list of international institutions. So Johannes, we're glad to have you. And it's probably important to mention that Johannes received the Golden Owl, which is a student award from our D-MTEC students in November last year for a recognition for his outstanding teaching efforts. Our second guest, Arber, is a student in the MSc program. And Arber is also a representative of OBIS, our student association in MTech. And there he talks about academic politics. And we've had a very intense contact over the last month in trying to bring the students' experiences, students' voices to the D-MTEC institution. And I think it's very helpful for you to share your experiences from a student perspective in our discussion conversation about teaching online. This is the very first edition. It is an experiment to bring our Teaching Innovation Lab events into a more public space. And we try this with this live video podcast for the first time. We're very glad to have your comments and also feedback afterwards. We have about 45 minutes-ish for the lunch break. And we hope you can stay with us for this duration. Shall we get started, Johannes, Arber?
I'd love to.
Yes, maybe Arber, if you can think back 12 months ago, what was your life like as a student? What has changed?
Well, that's a good question. I would start with different. So it's quite a long time, in particular, to think back how university was. I would start with September 2019. It was the start of the MSc program for us. We were Zurich was very vibrant. The university was very vibrant. Everyone really wanted to meet new people, especially in the international community. You realized that everyone was in the same spot and just wanted to find new friends, have a chat with everyone. And this was very, very interesting, especially in the beginning, because everyone was part of this community building, which is in particularly strong at MTech. But also the lectures. It was very common that you have, for example, lectures, and afterwards you just go for lunch, and also dinner at the Uni Mensa or at Polyteras, and this was so interesting because you were always in touch, not only with your closest friends, but also with others that you, for example, only take some classes with, and just having this community building, having the opportunity to see and to meet new people all the time. That was, I would say, one part of the social interaction. And when it comes now to how university was for us, I would say it was what we were used to in our bachelors. So the lectures were on premise, and but what was quite interesting was that we had a lot of group projects, which was very new, especially in comparison to our to most of our bachelors, which are rather technical, and the interaction within the groups. And I think ETH has the great spot because we have a lot of project rooms where we work together, and it was very intensive, but it was also great to share the experience, not only with yourself, but also with others. And this changed in the last year then completely.
Yeah. Johannes, how was your life like 12 months ago? What did you do 12 months ago?
Yeah, maybe I just, because you asked what changed, I thought maybe there's two things that I just thought that actually didn't change, and that I think proved to be quite important during everything that did change. And I think the two things that come to my mind directly relate to Arber and Eric. And one is, I think ETH invested a lot into educational, resources for education. So people like having specialists like you, Eric. And I think when I compare this to other schools and universities, I think that proved to be extremely important during the last 12 months. And I think the other thing that also didn't change is this extremely active and ambitious student body, and having students that are very demanding, but also critical and collegial in a way. So it's in a way it's I think we have a particularly nice crowd of students that make it easier to go through a crisis like this. So I just thought I don't want to miss these 2 points because I think they're really important. Yeah, I mean, if I look back 12 months ago, so my personal experience, COVID started, the school locked down, and I had to prepare a 3-day master class. So it's a block course with 3 full days, 8 hours, very interactive. Shift this from an in-class setting where we interact with the students, discuss, have coffees, breaks, to an online class. And I think the first thing I realized is how much preparation it takes to change teaching format. So I basically think in terms of it's 3 times the amount of coming up with a new course. That was very challenging. And then the second experience I had was in the last semester, changing a large lecture with 180, 200 students to an online course. And so I think there's there's a few things that came out. I mean, how important preparation is. We always talk about how difficult it is to maintain contact with the students and the lecturers in the classroom. And the risk in the online format is just that both the students and the lecturer, you kind of fade out from the conversation. So you need to be much more prepared and much more, have much shorter interaction points than during in-class teaching. That's kind of one of the, I think, key issues key challenges I think I faced. Yeah.
Arber, you also mentioned that the conversations among students and meeting before class, after class were really important, and that kind of changed. How was your experience of staying in contact with lecturers? Like after class, it was rather easy to go up front and have a conversation with the lecturer as well. Like, how could you explain this part again, or other questions? How have you changed your approach in communicating with lecturers?
So I would say it's twofold. So first, the communication with the department in its entirety, and then the individual exchange with professors. And I would say that the exchange with professors is quite limited now. To some professors, and to some others, I would say it even intensified. So maybe I can even point out one opportunity, and maybe one specific class in which it is actually great. So let's start with the classes where the communication is just completely, I would say, eliminated. These are the classes that went completely online. And we have 90 minutes of lecture, and then afterwards the professor just ends the class and leaves. And then it's rather difficult, because I would say the hurdle to send an email because you have a question for something is quite limited. And this is why, in my opinion, professors and classes should always emphasize to use Moodle. Because the Moodle forums give you the opportunity at least to get your questions answered, either by the professor, by the TAs, or teaching assistants, or in the end by other students. But the communication with the professor individually reduced there. Then there are some classes, I think specifically of macroeconomics, where the professor always offers a 15 minute span after the class to state questions. And I would say that students really take advantage of that. So I would say approximately 160 to 200 students have been in every class, and 120 or so stayed in the Q&A session afterwards. So we saw that, or I personally would have said that the demand is there and the interest is there. It always depends on the schedule of a professor, if they are able to offer it. But if they offer it, I've seen that students really love that. And actually want to have these discussions. And maybe we'll come back to this part of discussion in general, because I think this is one of the elements which was it was neglected, because it's very difficult to engage students in discussions, and these Q&A sessions actually enable that. So this is, but also the online version takes the hurdle for some to speak up. I also have experienced this myself, that
it actually becomes easier for students to participate in an online setting.
Exactly. I mean, there are two ways: either via chat, which is, I mean, the hurdle is zero, but also just speaking up, unmuting on Zoom with or without camera, the hurdle is quite low, because you. But in class, you always have, or some students have the feeling that maybe if I ask something stupid, people could see me or watch me. And in Zoom, it actually doesn't matter at all, because it's just a name or just a screen. And I think there's even some evidence on that the hurdle is reduced. In social community, it has already been discussed beforehand in social media, and I think the same is also applicable to Zoom. And the second point that I want to mention, maybe also to highlight the great work of the department, is that beforehand we had the teaching committee and then the department committee once a week, where students once or twice every semester, where students linked to the department. And since we've seen the need to be more interactive and to collaborate more intensively, we have changed that to bi-weekly meetings. And Eric and I, we have been participating all the time. And I think a lot of great new things came up that were not only related to COVID, but the entire situation, and that we have seen how much we can change when we collaborate more intensively. And I think it's a long answer to the question, but there have been opportunities because the opportunity cost to have such a meeting is very, very low now. And I think we have taken advantage of that.
I also realized meetings become easier because nobody has to travel across the city.
There's also, maybe just to add, because I think, I agree that this question of how we interact with each other, and kind of, I think you need to develop new forms. I think you need to think about new formats in the online platforms, how you interact. One of the experiences that as soon as participants started to use the chat function a lot, chat seems to be a very low barrier to entry, and then you have a very active discussion participating in parallel almost on the chat, and I think that was always a great experience. But I think this whole question of interaction also kind of brings more opportunities, in the sense that we started to critically reflect on what type of content do we need to interact, and what type of content can we kind of outsource from the online synchronous meeting part so what in terms of like, so I'm thinking in terms of what kind of interaction, for what kind of content you need what type of interaction. And I think it also brings opportunities to just critically go through your curriculum and think about this content, let's move it out of the actual online lecture and move it to somewhere else where the students can more flexibly schedule when they learn, and then use the time in the Zoom or in the online lecture more efficiently to actually use more interactive formats and think in terms of how you integrate students, how you trigger debates, etc.
So it needs more thought to combine the actual live session where you teach with the rest of the week. Communicate but are not like in the live class.
Yeah.
And I think the chat function or a discussion forum has this. It's there. It's accessible 24/7 on Moodle, and people can think about a question and have more consideration before writing an answer than in a live session sometimes. And maybe this is actually a potential strength to the online education.
And a bit what Arber was also mentioning, this point about the lectures that maybe didn't go so well were the ones where lectures just simply followed the same script as an in-class format, recorded it, possibly even had a hybrid structure where they had to pay attention to two very different audiences, one in class and then the other one on the laptop. And I think that kind of reveals this is not a very useful use of everyone's time. It's very difficult to actually follow a video if it's a monologue and it's not an actor who knows how to engage an audience. That you get into this point where it's fairly clear you need to think very different about how you teach. It's not just about content. It's not like an input-output model. It's a lot more about a process of teaching. So whereas a lecturer, you're more involved in I think guiding the students through the process of understanding a content rather than just simply delivering content. And that kind of process involves very specific contact points and very specific forms of interaction.
Aber, have your strategies for actually learning and taking part in courses, has that changed over the last 12 months?
I would say that the entire situation changed how we can leverage these opportunities and how we can leverage the formats. So I would start with some changes I would distinguish between learning and between teaching. So for me, the learning part is right now what I do at home. So just following the lectures or reviewing the lectures, doing the exercises and so on. And what changed there was that I am now able to learn in my own pace. So for example, when beforehand we had the lectures, and it's very, very difficult to grasp the content within 90 minutes. And because in particular, if it's something which is more quantitative, it takes more time to understand. And what you have to keep in mind is if you have 100, 200 or 300 students sitting in one lecture hall, no one learns at the same pace. And for me, that was always an issue, that if I didn't prepare for the lecture was just useless for me, because in the end I wouldn't understand a word. And after reviewing everything, I started to learn what it was about. And then, I could have just watched the end or reviewed all the slides without the lecture. And now, for example, if I have the recording, I can just stop the video whenever I see that I do not understand something. And it takes me never 90 minutes to review a lecture, but it always takes me 2 to 3 hours. And I would say that's not only my standpoint, but I have a lot of friends that contacted me and said, does it also take you 2 or 3 hours to review the lecture, even though you listen to the lecture at 1.75 speed? So even though you do that, you still need 2 or 3 hours because you stop all the time to understand what's happening there. And I think this is great. So I personally would say I shifted from live to recording throughout the time. In the beginning, I was trying to be a good student and to review to be live at every lecture, and then I realized, wait, actually I do understand things way better if I just do it afterwards. So the recording is a big plus. And what actually also changed is that I'm not able to go to the library anymore. And there was a meeting point where we learned together. And now everyone learns by themselves. And then from time to time, if you have some questions, you do your Zoom meetings with friends and discuss questions. But it is way more efficient how you use your time together, because no one wants to spend 3 or 4 hours together on Zoom to discuss things. But this is something you would have done at VEF at the MTEC building, where you just said, okay, let's go there and let's meet up for 3 or 4 hours to learn. And actually you would have learned, I don't know, 2 hours, and the other 2 hours you would have been very non-efficient. But this is also the part of social interaction. But
what's the part?
Maybe what? Yeah.
Because now you were talking about the studying part. So if you bring this form of studying to the extreme, it basically means let's hire a few professional actors. We record all the content at ETH in perfectly well done. As a lecturer, I'll write the script, so the content, but then I'll give it to someone who can actually present it, and then you have your video that you can use at home to study. But what's the benefit of a lecture then? So
I personally have right now the opinion that we should reverse teaching and learning. So right now we learn at home and we teach at university. And I personally, I started doing online classes in Coursera the last few months, and there I realized how comfortable it is to be taught at home, because, as I said, the pace and also the comfortability. And then what I'm missing, for example, in Coursera, and I think this is something that's very difficult to achieve in e-learning, I want to have the learning experience with my peers. And this is something that could have been engaged or could have been pushed in universities, where the lecturer is actually in the class and knows exactly which questions to ask, which projects to work on, what discussions he or she should start in order to make the students question more the content more deeply. And this is something that you could do in class then.
Yeah. So that's the critical reflection part on the, so that's very close to what I call kind of not the input-output model, but kind of more the process where you need to have students that come prepared to class, and then you just kind of go in a more critical way through the content and guide the process of understanding, what you've studied in terms of raw content before. So that's...
But something that I see in like the classical online learning, as you mentioned, Arber, with Coursera or edX, where you get content, and it's usually video quiz, maybe some reading, and it often lacks this community experience, as you mentioned, like where are my peers? Where can I discuss things to really dig deeper and try to explain things to understand them better? And there are a few online courses now that really build on like live cohorts, so we really learn with others, and this community aspect and this accountability aspect with your peers and vis-a-vis a lecturer becomes an important element. And I think it's something that we can explore further in our teaching, how we can really make use of the live session time that we have to bring questions, to have these discussions, to let this sense of community also emerge, that students can talk with each other, not only like listen to the content that is being delivered. But it's a challenge for in the transition of these courses to make them fit for learning through a webcam and teaching through a webcam. This is an unfamiliar territory for many lecturers still.
It's also not easy for everyone to. I mean, I know Arber as a you're a very structured, disciplined student, but I think it's also. I mean, we've seen this at ETH. I think with a lot of students that it's quite challenging to work in a disciplined, structured, scheduled way by yourself at home. And I think we've also seen this, beyond the ETH university area. When you look at elementary schools and high schools, when you bring, when you kind of broaden the learning environment to the school setting, to a setting beyond the school, whatever is beyond the school needs to be the environment needs to be designed in a way that people can also have the opportunity to learn there. And at home, I think this means, for example, with smaller kids that parents, most parents aren't teachers, but that they have some sort of idea of how to do homeschooling. And I think this, and going back to ETH, I think a lot of students found it very difficult to structure their day in a clear way, and also then to cope with this isolated situation. So I think there's a lot of bigger questions there as well that are kind of
mentioning is critical, in particular because structure was built in. Structure was already established by university. You had on Mondays at 8 a.m. you had your first lecture. Attended you had the follow-up lecture, and it continued. And you had the entire schedule, so that you didn't have to choose what to do. And there is something which is called now the Zoom fatigue, which is actually not the Zoom fatigue, but the home office fatigue, because you have to decide all the time what you do next. And I think this is in particular difficult for a lot of students that used to use the pre-given structure by the university. So they had to make less decisions. It was easier to follow up, and by now. They are challenged because they have to make all the decisions themselves, and they haven't been used to. And for example, one trick that a lot of people give to students is to do it, for example, every evening. To never do the decisions in the morning, because that takes a lot of capacity from you away. So to do it in the evening and to decide every evening when you're very, very tired, what am I going to do tomorrow? So maybe for some listener who has difficulties in that. And the second aspect that you mentioned is motivation. And I would like to distinguish here students like us that have been not prepared for that when starting the MSc program, and students that started this semester. So I think what I've experienced in the beginning, so in summer 2020, it was very, very difficult. A lot of students didn't have any motivation to study at all, because the only, or not the only, but one of the reasons they studied was because of peer pressure. Not only peer pressure, but the feeling to be with others in the library, in the project rooms, and to study with others, to follow up on the projects. But then a lot of students went home. So you're not only not in the city anymore with your peers, but you're now at home. And for example, you see your sister or your brother doing other stuff, and that takes even more reasons to be motivated from you. And then, as I said, the motivation dropped tremendously. And then now the students starting in September, I think they have been more prepared for the situation, because they knew how the summer went, how the first semester with COVID went. And even though they were prepared, I still see that motivation is less than for I would say a regular semester cohort.
You mentioned very interesting, very important point that last year those students who were already at ETH, they had the chance to get to know each other personally. Now, those students who started in the first semester in September, they started fully online. They never really met their peers in person. And Arber, you co-moderated the MTech MSc Buddies program to really have to address that issue, to meet the younger students and team up with more senior students to show them the tricks of studying at MTech. What was your key takeaway from that experience?
Let me first start to introduce what was the reason of doing that, because I think that's very, very interesting to see how the process went. And I mentioned in the beginning that we had these bi-weekly meetings with the department, and we actually did surveys regarding how the students feel and what they're missing. And we saw that social interaction was mentioned most frequently. So we thought, how can we change that? And in particular, looking at what's going to happen in the future in September, the new starting students, how can we avoid the same issues? And we then came up together with the department and students with a plan to build a buddy program. That means to combine senior students that are in the second or third year of MTech with the first year students starting in September. And in particular, when we had the opportunity to meet in person, that was, I would say, from September to until end of October, students met quite frequently, either in the buddy group, but also in their friends group that they have made. But I think what was the buddy program for and what made it so valuable was that you do not only meet your friends, but you also meet people that you haven't met before. And you become friends through the buddy program. So you have, and this is something which is important at MTech, it is networking and community building, because it will be very important in your career afterwards. So that we want people to not have 5, 6, or 7 friends in the program, but to be friends with, or to be at least in a community and to feel as a participant in this community with 70, 80 other students. And then it was, as I said, we had frequent meetings in the beginning. And at some point of time, after the not the lockdown, but the restrictions, we have seen that the interactions and the meetings dropped again, because Zoom meetings are just not the same as regular meetings. But what we did then, we did, for example, a pizza event where we invited all the students that participated in the buddy program, the senior and the junior students, and actually a lot of them participated. So I think from 80 students that have in the program, 65 participated. So if you do it correctly, and if you do an engaging program, we did a quiz there. And
it's quite fun.
For us, it was also fun hosting it. But what's interesting is these individual Zoom meetings were not really utilized. No one wanted to do that. But if you choose the right format, and if you do it, as I said, again, in the lecture, if you have engaging lectures, if you have engaging meetings, people want to do it, no matter if it's virtual or not, because we're currently desperate for social interaction. And that's why if you do the right format, which can be via Zoom or we use Wonder, it's actually very nice.
Johannes, you also talked at a different occasion about student health and well-being, and I think this is that's dear to you. What is your experience as a lecturer? How much contact do you have with students, and how do you grasp these kind of issues?
Yeah, we talked. I mean, the ETH student body, I said that before, they're very active, and they also run regular surveys among the students about their mental health, well-being, issues like this. So we had this panel where we debated a few things. I think one thing as a lecturer, it was very difficult for me to kind of have a good sense of how the students in my class feel. So in a normal in-class setting, that's a bit easier. I mean, there's always kind of, you always see different behaviors where you're not sure is that because someone is annoyed or happy or sad, or so you get some sort of feedback, but you have more interaction there, and it gives you a bit of a sense where you can also ask during a coffee how someone's doing or feeling or something, and you don't really have that in online format so much. And so as a lecturer, I think we only see this when students drop out, or when, like at kind of late, like kind of the last moment, and you ideally want to see this before. But I think it's a difficult issue. It's a difficult question. It kind of, for us, or for me, it kind of brought up the question we've been calling this measure social distancing, but I think in fact what we're doing is physical distancing. And so I think we have to find new ways of balancing physical distancing, either for health reasons or maybe after Corona also for environmental reasons, right? We don't need conferences with 12,000 people physically present but socially distant, right? So you want to have some sort of formats that kind of are physically allow for physical distance, but then kind of bring in social proximity or so. And I think one thing, I think I just pay a bit more attention to, or try to pay a bit more attention about how people feel, and be more explicit about asking people how they're doing, or calling. I'm not socially distant. I have a family at home. I have too many people around me, but so I know of a lot of colleagues and friends who are single and no family, or students, and when I kind of have the feeling maybe they're not doing so well, just kind of call them and just ask how they're. That's a simple thing. Just ask people how they're doing, right? It's a very low entrance barrier issue. Just authentic interest in how you're doing, and but it's challenging, and I'm not sure if we already found the right way of addressing mental health issues in such a situation in a proper way, because I think the surveys from ETH, they kind of show this is a big problem, and it's a big problem especially during the last year. As maybe one thing that I also realized as a lecturer, I kind of feel a bit like a host in the classroom. So as I'm a bit I'm kind of the representative of the school when I'm in this class lecturing, and it does give me some sort of responsibility to provide some sort of a safe and healthy workplace for the students, where they can come and feel where as human beings we deal with each other in a respectful manner, in a safe place where you don't. I have a problem with sarcasm and irony, so I've tried to reduce that part a bit. But yeah, only attempts. I don't know.
Great. For our listeners and viewers out there, if you have questions to Johannes, Arber, or me, use the comment function on YouTube, and it will pop up in our broadcasting studio. We're talking about experiences from remote teaching, and you just mentioned, Johannes, that you're also a representative of the department when you teach. Isn't that a bit too much responsibility? Isn't that like going beyond your assignment as a lecturer?
I'm not sure if the department would formulate it in this way. It's more as I kind of realized my role as a host, or I feel a bit like I invite students to my classroom. We've had this it kind of occurred to me in a discussion with another lecturer a few months ago. It was slightly on a different topic. We have a very international student body, and sometimes, depending on the topics we teach, we have to be a bit careful in. I don't think we have a problem of racism, but sometimes we have a problem of respectful handling of each other's background. And so I don't want to go into too much into detail, but sometimes, if you think of a situation, you talk about Chinese companies, and then some student in the classroom starts to make statements about China or, so these kind of situations, those are situations when I usually will interfere also in the discussion and kind of regulate the debate to make sure to kind of signal to everyone this is an environment where we have to, we can be critical, but we have to be respectful. And so this is when this role as a host became kind of most apparent to me. But I don't think it's, I think it's, in a way, I hope every lecturer sees this part of their role or this particular role when they teach. But I also don't think it's too much of a responsibility. I think it's just part of the job assignment. I see it a bit as maybe an implicit part of the job description.
Yeah, I think respect is an interesting topic. I remember, like, when we transitioned to online education, the first few instances popped up about Zoom bombing, where in an online teaching format, somebody showed up to class basically in his bathing suits. Is that, how do students, is it still in their mind that now I'm attending university, now I'm going to class because I'm on Zoom, or are you sometimes slouching on the couch and having some chocolate while attending class?
That is a good question. And I have to be honest that I followed most of the lectures in I would say in the typical setting, so sitting on a desk and wearing at least some clothes or proper clothes, because it helps to also to structure the day and to not feel too sluggish. But there are also some days where you, for example, it's kind of twofold, because for example, if I wouldn't, there were some classes where professors really insisted on turning on the camera. And they really want that because they said they want to have the interaction. But there are, for example, some days where I'm traveling, but I still want to listen to the lecturer. And in my opinion, I'm showing tremendous respect because I love his lecture or his or her lecture so much that I really want to listen to it. But it's just not the right setting. But because of an appointment or anything. And there are also some days where you're so tired, and it was just you have, for example, a long study night or whatever, and then in the morning at 8 a.m. you have a lecture, and I want to listen to it, but I cannot get out of bed. And then it's the perfect situation to just turn on the Zoom session either on my laptop or my phone, and I still can listen to it. So for me, it's even respecting the content of the professor so much, because I want to listen to it, but and I make it to it, but maybe I'm not wearing or I do not have the proper setting right now. So it's always how you, or from what perspective are you looking at respect in this sense.
I didn't have any instance of, I don't know how often this really happens, but in our classes, either the people are too sophisticated already and they know that you don't turn on your camera when you walk around naked in the house, basically. But I think we've also, I think this is also a point where we become a bit more relaxed. Why not sit on the balcony and listen and join the lecture if the weather is nice, or or if you're traveling. I think that's why not?
I've seen also lecturers are teaching from home and have families, and if their dogs or cats are jumping on the desk or kids are appearing in the frame, it becomes part of this online teaching experience.
But I would rather say that it adds something personal. It adds value to because it's not a lot, but I know who this professor is, and I know that this professor is not reluctant to showing any kind of emotions or part of his or her family, and I appreciate that. So when some students or professors say, I'm not alone at home, I do not want to turn on the camera, I totally accept it, and it's fine, because everyone, I should respect everyone's decision. But
we have a comment from YouTube from Cedric. Forcing the camera on can be tricky. Thank you for the comment. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's just sometimes it's really, especially in order to make it easier to maintain contact and interaction, it really is easier to have the camera on often. And I think also if the lecture or if the session is designed in a way that you're supposed to interact, then also this idea of I'm going on a train just doesn't work anymore. And I think then then you have to ask yourself, do I want to join the lecture and learn the content and get the credits or not? And I think that's so, I think as long as the format, the content allows for it, just keep your camera off. But assuming the content and the formats require interaction and presence, and we have a lot of these formats where I need to know how many students are in class, because we'll work in multiple teams, and then we bring back the results from the teamwork that we had in breakouts, and we bring this together in some sort of different overarching content. In those situations, it's difficult if you have students that maybe don't have the camera on, but at least are not as actively engaged as in other settings. And I think the other thing is, with this large lecture, and Eric, you asked how we deal with students or how we maintain content. I mean, in essence, if there's a class of 50 students and that was in class, I would see all the 50 students all the time. Now what I see is, probably 5 students with camera on and active, and then 40 students with camera off and maybe listening and maybe not, or fading in, fading out. And there's definitely a couple that are just there because they think they need to show presence, but they might not even listen, or be on another call or something. So if you think of it as some sort of, what do I see? This whole group of students that I don't see is much larger than compared to the classroom.
So it's a bit like teaching into a fog. You only see a few things, you don't see it all. And you have to have confidence in yourself and your message, your content.
Yeah.
I have a look at the time, and we're reaching the 45-minute mark. We've actually just passed it. I think it was a very interesting conversation. We could have easily continued this conversation, but lunch breaks tend to have their natural limit. Thank you all for tuning in. If you've seen us live, we'll make this recording also available if you want to rewatch it. Arber told us that there's an added value in recording elements. Johannes and Arber, thank you both so much for your time and your perspectives. I think it was very valuable, and I feel quite confident that this first experiment of a virtual live video podcast from the Teaching Innovations Lab could be something that we can repeat. If you have comments, reach out, write me an email, contact me. And with this, I would give Johannes and Arber the last word to say a farewell and goodbye.
Johannes?
Well, thank you, Eric, for the invitation. We talked just before the session, Arber and I talked, and maybe just as some sort of a final word, I really hope that in the school, but also beyond the school, we'll take the opportunity in the summer to really reflect on what we can learn from the last 1.5 years. Don't miss the time, don't wait until 2022 and fall back into the normal routines. I think the department is already doing that, and the school, but I think there are so many learnings, and I think we need to, I really hope that we can kind of collect them after the summer when the crisis is over, and then swiftly implement them.
I would like to follow up on that, and what Johannes is saying is great, that we should not fall back to the status quo before. And I would like to encourage every student to really think what was missing, what was great, and what could be improved, and to engage. I've seen that in the last 12 months that if you want to engage with the department, with the university, they are open. And what was interesting is that very often you said, "Oh, okay, we weren't aware of that. We weren't aware of that because sure, we are the students. We know what impacts us the most. And this is why we have to come up and talk to you, to the teachers, to the professors, to the department, and to make change happen. So this is just what I would really encourage every student to take the advantage, either via OBIS or directly. Talk to the professors, talk to everyone, and try to improve what we have now here.
Great. Thanks a lot. Great words to finish. To you out there, we'll say goodbye. And well, see you next time. We'll keep you posted.
Perfect.
Bye-bye.